Hello everybody, this is Cheryl McLeod from EnChoice. I want to thank you for joining the third webinar in our ECM series with EMC and FME, Spotlight on InfoArchive, What's New and What's Next. The presentation will be approximately 45 minutes long, followed by a question and answer session. All participant lines will remain mute during this event. To submit a question, please use the questions box on your control panel. You may submit a question at any time, however, it will not be answered until the end of the presentation. I'd like to review the agenda first before we begin the webinar. First, before we begin, I'm going to quickly run through the agenda. First, Bryant Bell of EMC, Product Marketing Manager, Archiving and Pervasive Governance, will give an overview of the InfoArchive platform and benefits such as cost reduction, regulatory compliance, and data accessibility. Next, Frank Dantrone, President of FME US, will provide a brief overview of FME and then deliver a primer on how InfoArchive works. He'll follow with an overview of FME's Migration Center and use cases that address the challenges of migrating to InfoArchive. Frank will give a technical review of InfoArchive and finish with an overview of the InfoArchive product roadmap and a wrap-up. We'll follow with a Q&A session. Welcome, Bryant. It's all yours.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. If you can go to the next slide, that'd be great. And we'll get started. And I want to thank everybody who's attending, taking time out of their day to listen to us, give you a little bit of information about what we feel is a very valuable solution for being able to really manage your data. And to that point, if we can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we realized at EMC, and especially with our product InfoArchive, is that as businesses push to really modernize and digitize their infrastructures and their processes, one of the things that they're really looking at is their data. And the data that's being created and accumulated by our customers is really becoming a huge strategic asset. And that's an asset for them to be able to look at what they've done in the past and look at the information and to help them provide better visibility into where they're going. But that information also can be proprietary, intellectual property, and also has regulatory controls on it as well. So these are all things that make data very valuable. And one of the challenges is that a lot of this data now is on legacy applications and redundant applications that aren't compatible with the new technologies that companies are bringing on. So Cheryl, if you could move to the next slide. So what InfoArchive is it is a true platform or solution that helps organizations unlock data that's trapped in applications, helps them lower IT costs, and preserve compliance, and then allows you to access that data for new applications, and also really unlocks it so other business units can look at that information as well and use it to their advantage. Next slide, please. And we really, our customers are using InfoArchive in really three main areas of benefit. The first, and the one that drives some immediate ROI, is an area that we call cost takeout. And this is really the ability to decommission your legacy and redundant applications and be able to pull both structured data and unstructured content off of old applications, place it inside InfoArchive, maintain the compliance and security on that information, but allow accessibility of that information to new applications and to new business users. We also help our customers with optimizing their current applications or production applications by being able to right-size those applications. And as we know, a lot of applications now are what we call very data hungry and producing a lot of data. And the studies show that close to 60% of that data that's produced by your production applications is what we would call static, or information that once it's created isn't going to change again. A lot of those things are things like invoices and transaction records, information such as that. And so InfoArchive can help alleviate the storage burden, but also help with the performance of the production applications by pulling that information off, storing it in InfoArchive, and then providing new ways to access that information throughout the organization. And then the third way we're really helping companies is helping them transform their IT infrastructure. And this is really looking at whether you're pulling on a new application and you need to migrate data over to that new application. Sometimes migration directly into a new application isn't the most efficient way to do that. Sometimes a lot of that information you want to be able to lock it down but provide access to your new applications. And InfoArchive can do that. The other area where we definitely help is an area that is now sort of referred to by a new acronym called SMAC. So organizations that are getting pressure from their executives and from their business units to adopt social, mobile, analytic, and cloud technologies, and that's the SMAC, and really be able to provide access to historical information along with new information. And InfoArchive, through its open APIs on the back end, can provide that accessibility to those new applications. So next slide, please. So a couple functional areas about InfoArchive. One of the things that makes InfoArchive very compelling to a lot of our customers is that it is a compliant platform. So any information that is brought into InfoArchive can reap the advantages of a full-fledged compliance application. So there's retention and disposition, multiple retention policies, both event and date-based retention policies, also legal holds and full chain of custody are all built into InfoArchive. And this is particularly important for those companies that are decommissioning legacy applications that they've been holding on to just for compliance reasons. Now they have a new modern platform which to put that information into, but they can maintain all the compliance that they need to adhere to governance and regulations. Next slide, please. So I talked a little bit about making data accessible. We really call this application data unlocked. But once information is into InfoArchive, both structured and unstructured, our customers can access that information either through reports, but they can also, when they look at it, the reports can go over the different data sets that are in InfoArchive and be able to look at complete contextual information. So really being able to look at your data and its associated content or related content together in one place. So you're not having to go to separate repositories. You have one place for all of that information. You can look at it together and provide greater contextual value when you're looking at that. It's also can be accessible by your social, mobile, cloud applications as well. And the other thing, especially when InfoArchive is combined with Isilon, the data that's held within InfoArchive on an Isilon platform is what we call HDFS ready, or can become a compliant data source for big data analytics. Next slide, please. And then we talk about architected for everyday use. And this is really when we talk about accessibility to the information that's in InfoArchive. We realize that the application needs to be easy to use, which it is, but also needs to be able to have those interfaces that allow ease of use. And InfoArchive has a configurable UI built into it, so your different business units can view their information that they need to see in the way they want to see it. We've gone so far as some manufacturing business units wanted to see legacy inventory that they had, and they were used to looking at it in an old green screen, so the tab and enter. With the configurable UI, we were able to build that same interface for that business group, and being able to do that actually eliminated the burden sometimes that IT fears with adoption to new applications. So these are things that InfoArchive has inherent to it, and that is my short overview. And then with that, I'm going to hand it over to Frank.
Okay, thank you, Brian. That was a great introduction, really helped segue into my portion of the webinar. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you a little overview of FME for those who may not be that familiar with us. So we can go to the next slide. So some quick facts about FME. Our main focus, or our main lane, if you will, is to really work with our clients on innovation around information management, predominantly in life sciences and industrial manufacturing, and the more being more on the technology layer, where it's industry agnostic, which most of what we're going to talk about today really covers the broad spectrum. More being more on the industry agnostic, really covers the broad spectrum of across industries. So next, we really spent quite a bit of time around ECM custom development. Those are just some high points to personal facts. Founded in 1995, a global organization. Our headquarters is in Germany. And areas, excuse me, in the U.S. and Romania. We can go to the next slide. So I thought it was appropriate for those who are getting familiar with InfoArchive on the technology, wanting to learn more, is to give a little bit of a primer. So the four main options in terms of archiving is table archiving, where you have table structures where you want to maintain that data integrity between tables. That's one area, that's one lane, or option from an archiving perspective. The next is data record archiving, where you have single records or XML, for example, that you want to archive and preserve that integrity from that data, that application. The next would be file archiving, potentially unstructured data. In some cases, FME is providing some capability in this area. But the fourth option is most of what I'm going to speak of today is around this hybrid record archiving, where it's unstructured content, sort of structured and semi-unstructured data. So this is most of what I'm going to speak of today, but I figured let me give you sort of the four main areas that InfoArchive is covering. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, so for the overview, so InfoArchive process overview. So there's two sort of generic main areas. The extraction of information from the source, which FME, and I'm going to talk more in the slides that are coming on how we accelerate that process, so that pre-InfoArchive phase where you have your source applications, the connector being FME Migration Center, the transfer, so we're able to handle that heavy lifting in that pre-InfoArchive area. And then you get into the actual InfoArchive engine, where you have ingestion, archive services being retention, immutability, access, control, etc. And then you have the retrieval, which Brian had mentioned earlier, is how you consume that information from a retrieval perspective. So this slide is giving us an overview of sort of what's the foundation of the technology. So it's based on the OASIS standard. So it's an Open Archive Information Systems. That's what that stands for. It's designed according to their reference model. So this is a collection of a group that's defined this reference model, and that's what EMC has opted inside of the InfoArchive technology. And the diagram here is just giving you a big picture of what those segments are. And I have some additional slides that's going to describe the different segments of this to give you a little more background, where you have, you know, the collection point on the left side, and then you pass that structured or unstructured data into the ingestion process, which then transitions to the actual archive, which is the archive information packages, the AIPs, and then at the end you have the retrieval, the access, and that what the dissemination information package, which the acronym would be DIPs. So we can go to the next slide. Just on another high-level architecture, the different layers of the stack. So at the very front end, you have your source applications, the connectors, which I mentioned. You have the GUI on the upper right-hand corner. You have the batch ingestion, which then sits on top, both data access and the batch and transaction ingestion sits on top of the archive services layer. And within that archiving services layer, there's the EMC has the XDB data services engine and the content server for content, and then beneath that is the storage platform, which would be depending on the type of storage that you have in-house. That's where that layer of the architecture sits. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, and here we have sort of a bit more of a description on what these submission information packages are. It's really the container, if you will. It's a container that stores a set of files they're going to be transported into the ingestion process. So the SIP is ingested to the archive, and that's what becomes the archive information package. And based on the classification, the content is stored in this what they call archive holding. So when an end user wants to request that data from the archive, the data would then, as I said earlier, would be disseminated into the dissemination package, which would be the DIP. So let's go to the next slide. And the reason why I mention these things is because it really segues into the main message, the main point where FME is coming from is we provide automation and an acceleration in this part, this packaging piece, which you'll see in some slides that are coming. So the SIP is comprised of three main areas, three main elements. There's a metadata file in XML that's really describing what's in the SIP, and then you get the next file is another XML that holds metadata associated to that content that's going to be archived, and then the third piece is the actual content, the unstructured content, the files that are going to be stored into the archive. So we can go to the next slide. And here we have the SIP, because it's really a main part of the archiving process. So I wanted to kind of put a little picture here to describe it. So this really shows you the components, and focusing, at least for this webinar, talking predominantly around unstructured content. So you have, again, the SIP XML, you have your metadata and the content. It's packaged up into a zip. And this whole piece that I'm showing on the screen, the system A all the way through the zip, that's where FME is fitting and providing acceleration and using our software to fulfill this part of the puzzle. And let's go to the next slide. And this is where I'm going to kind of dig a little deeper further into where FME Migration Center fits into this whole story that we're talking about today. So there's a number of use cases, a number of challenges around data migration. We're going to focus on the two in the replace and the others columns or pillars, where we have a focus in today's webinar around decommissioning legacy applications into InfoArchive, and also archiving documents from multiple EMC or multiple ECM systems into EMC InfoArchive. Those are the two main high points that we're going to cover today. So let's go to the next slide. So 8 unique capabilities of Migration Center. So as you can imagine, from an archive or unified archive perspective, the volumes are going to be quite large. So again, this is the business that we're in. we're able to handle large data sets, large data volumes, and we could certainly discuss that some further if there's some questions towards the end of the webinar. I can speak to that. We have a central migration database. We store within FME Migration Center all of the necessary artifacts that are needed to perform the extraction, transformation, and the ingestion into InfoArchive. We have a step-by-step process, so it's a very prescriptive process within our software that guides you through the different configurations that are necessary to get from the source to the actual target platform. And we have a whole sequence of configurability in terms of metadata transformation, which I'll speak to in some slides that are coming. Now we can real-time simulate, so we can do this and simulate what this process is going to be like before you actually perform it. So we can predict what the outcome is going to be before you actually perform the actual extraction or the ingestion process. And we are able to handle delta migrations. This is another unique selling point, is around the ability to know what's been collected versus what's been changed or added. So this is what we call delta migration. And full audit capability, so we keep track of what we're doing on the extraction and the loading, and we have an open connectivity architecture within our software, so we can adapt our framework into unique customer requirements. So we can go to the next slide. So here's a broad picture to speak a few words about this, and then we're going to dig into the next slides. So here is sort of Migration Center is in the center. That's where the engine is. On the left-hand side, we support a number of ECM technologies, which I'm not going to get into all of them. But on the right-hand side is where we can push the information from the source ECM technologies into the target. Today we're speaking of InfoArchive, but we can also, which I have a few slides that speaks to, making decisions based on the information that you're collecting. So what you collect may be static and may be a perfect fit to go into InfoArchive. We certainly handle that. And another pieces of content and metadata may belong into your Documentum repository, with D2 or Life Science Solutions, what have you. So we're able to collect information, make decisions based on the business requirements, perform those, execute on those requirements and decisions into our transformation rules, and then we're able to push that content into its appropriate location, InfoArchive being a major area for us, but also the ECM, Documentum being a repository being another. So we can go to the next slide. So here's a little picture that's really describes, at least at a high level, what I just mentioned. We have a number of source systems supported where we're extracting content and metadata. That's the unstructured and semi-unstructured. The semi-unstructured would be your metadata that's associated to that content. We're able to pull that into Migration Center, and as I said earlier, making the appropriate decisions. Is it active? For example, this document, this data set is frequently used or frequently changes, and is what I would declare being active. That, I would say, would be go towards your active content path, which would be MC Documentum. Or I have documents, I think Bryant mentioned earlier, that are hardly ever changing or may never change, and or may only be accessed on a as-needed basis, so once a year or not. And that would be, I would declare that as inactive content, which actually we can go to the next slide. And here's just some statistics around some percentages. So 60 to 80% of data is operational and operational applications in inactive. So this is what our main message is. We want to target that information. We want to take that information, preserve it for a number of regulatory or compliance reasons, and we want to put that in a place where you can still gain access to it, still meet your regulatory requirements, but also gain the savings that Brian had alluded to in the slides that he was covering. So we at FMA want to be able to, we're able to make those decisions, identify that data set with our customers, and make that determination what should be pushed into the archive and what should be pushed into your more day-to-day active ECM or ECM document or Documentum platform. So let's go to the next slide. So here's another graphic or picture that just further demonstrates what I've been saying, where Migration Center supports multiple platforms on the source. It could legacy applications, Lotus Notes, maybe it's a legacy SharePoint farm, a very old historical document repository that you want to archive. So we support a number of source systems that we can collect from and push that through Migration Center, and like I said earlier, that would be declared or based on business requirements and metadata rules to be declared as inactive content, which will push to the InfoArchive, and we can provide in the holding retention, security access, things of that nature. So this is what we would call the application decommissioning scenario. We go to the next slide. So here we have sort of a hybrid. So we have data that is coming from these sources, content and metadata, and I have the need, which I mentioned earlier, to make decisions to push that content, what we would call active content, into your ECM platform that you've implemented, Documentum, for example. So here we're able to, based on very simple or complex rules, make that determination and set up that configuration and push in parallel. So we can collect data and then push in parallel data that should go into the active content repository and information that should go into the static or inactive content repository InfoArchive. And we're able to do this in a repeatable way. So once we set up the rules, once we define what criteria is to make those decisions, this is repeatable and can be scheduled. And like I said earlier, we have that sort of incremental capability. So this could be done on a daily or on some type of frequency that's necessary. So we can go to the next slide. And here's the live archiving. It's a similar scenario. I mean, the beauty about our software and Migration Center is that the interface is the same regardless of what type of path or migration path that you're executing. So if you're going from file share to Documentum, if you're going from an old version of Documentum to D7, if you're going from a proprietary database application with content to Documentum or to InfoArchive, our software is the same methodology, the same step, that sort of sequence of events that takes place. It's the same process for all of those different paths. So we can go to the next slide. So here are just some use cases summarizing a lot of what I've already mentioned, but sort of recapping a little bit. So here we have classic content migration, where we separate the inactive from active content during that migration process with Migration Center. File share, I mean, you may have terabytes of content sitting on network shares that you want to put context to, that you want to preserve, but you don't want to keep maintaining out there on the network. It's another use case that we're seeing where InfoArchive can fit well, because we can grab the folder structure, we can make sense of that folder hierarchy, we can pick and choose what parts of that path are attributes and store that information in a meaningful way into InfoArchive. The third would be application decommissioning, which we've been talking about today, or decommissioning, or taking those legacy ECM systems and splitting, or not, if it all needs to be archived into InfoArchive, that's okay. But again, making those decisions based on the information, we have that capability. Repository consolidation, so you may have a number of repositories, multiple Documentum repositories or other data sources that you want to consolidate. Very common use case that we're seeing with our customer base. Again, we touched on most of that already. And then you might have a need to push stuff or have things on-prem or off. So as long as we have access to that repository, we're able to collect transform, and load depending on your choice of location. And last, live archiving, again, extracting that inactive content from that production ECM system. For example, Brian had mentioned, I have a documents or an archive, not an archive, but an ECM where I'm storing invoices, etc., that are historical, but there might be some that you want to have there for 6 months. Well, we can look at document or invoices that have been created that are in the system that are older than a certain threshold, and those we can push off to the archive, and this would be a very classic scenario for us. So we can go to the next slide. So here's just a little more about Migration Center and really putting it all together and how all the concepts and things that you've heard already are really going to just be described here more from a Migration Center perspective. So let's go to the next slide. So here I'm going to kind of breeze through this because we touched on a lot of it. Multiple source platform support, again, Alfresco, Documentum, SharePoint, Lotus Notes. We create the SIP, so we'll generate that SIP and collect the content. We do this automatically in our software based on criteria, which I've been mentioning over the course of the last 15 minutes. And then we have rules-based, so we generate those XML files, those metadata files that are required within the InfoArchive architecture. We're generating those for you, so really accelerating and automating that whole pre-InfoArchive phase that I mentioned early on in the webinar. And last, we have the XML transformation, which is the output, and this is what, in case this output does not meet their needs, so we actually validate this against the InfoArchives, what they're expecting, so we actually can make sure that what we collect and create is going to adhere to what the ingestion process is looking for. So we can go to the next slide. And here we have the XML output. Actually, I just mentioned that part. So the XML output is validated against the schema definition. That's the actual InfoArchive holding. I mentioned that already. And we have post-processing capabilities. So this is where once those SIP packages are created, we batch process that. It's triggered. It triggers the ingestion automatically, and this allows us to automate this whole process that I mentioned earlier. So the collection, the transformation, the generation of the packages that needs to be passed to the ingestion process. We trigger the ingestion process, and then we also have, as part of that, I mentioned earlier, this routing. We can push this to InfoArchive and other data into Documentum, for example, D2. And I'm not going to go through each step, but this is what I was explaining earlier. We have these defined steps in our process, analyzing being collect, organizing being breaking up data into segments that make sense, where it may need to go, into a Documentum or into an InfoArchive. And then the transformation rules is where we generate those XMLs, the InfoArchive artifacts. We validate it, we do some error corrections if we need to, and then we generate the packages that the ingestion process needs. So we can go to the next slide. And here is just another graphical representation of the source technologies on the left. Migration Center is really, everything's funneling through Migration Center. And then the DSS, or this is where the SIPs are created. And inside that SIP package, we're generating all of that information that InfoArchive needs to kick off the ingestion process. So we can go to the next slide. A little busy, but just to give you a feeling, it's more just to show you that, you know, the upper left-hand corner is a graphic. It's a picture of our user interface, the Migration Center. And down below, we have that XML, so we're actually, based on mapping rules and configuration, we generate the XML on the bottom left corner, and also we generate the additional XML, which is having your metadata, your attribute, the actual details of the holding. All of that is automatically generated. So we're an accelerator. So if with our software we're able to automate or through an interface collect, configure, and package the information so that it can be ingested into the InfoArchive. So we can go to the next step. So here's just a little summary of what's on the horizon. And I think one of the agenda items was around roadmap. This is around FME Migration Center, not so much the InfoArchive roadmap. So I just wanted to correct that in case we might have misinterpreted or misstated. So I'm going to explain to some things that are coming from the FME perspective. It's our software, but it's for InfoArchive. So we're able to, so here the next release is automatically generate the holding schema. So this further accelerates the automation, because right now we have to create the holding definition. Well, that's a process that we do in our software. We have to configure and create manually the actual definition, the XSD, but what we're looking to add in is based on the package or the metadata that you select in the configuration, we're going to generate that XSD, that holding definition. So this would further accelerate the process and reduce some burden on our customers. The next is supporting the web services layer from InfoArchive. So this is another area that we're investing in to further build into our technology automation and more tightly integrate, instead of being sort of loosely coupled, more tightly coupled to InfoArchive, leveraging their web services interface. And last is just general enhancements in usability around some of the detailed tasks around importing the XSD, introducing a new archive process. So these things we're looking to add some enhancements to the usability area. So let's go to the next slide. So I just wanted to pull together just a high-level summary of some takeaways. So why you should consider InfoArchive. Really looking at it's one product, one technology, it's modular, it's volume-based, it's one archive covering a number of use cases, structured and unstructured use cases. It's in terms of technology, and then specifically around use cases, we have decommissioning and active archiving. It has, as I said earlier, these 4 archiving strategies, which I mentioned. Archiving any data type, so really, content of any type of content, unstructured content, the ability to configure retention, audit, and security based on your needs and requirements, and at the end, it's based on standards, XML and OASIS. So I think this might conclude my segment. Let's go to the next slide just to, I guess have a couple more. So if there's any interest, and I know we have contact information on the last slide, so if there's any interest with FME in terms of InfoArchive, we certainly would love to engage with you on that. We have an offering here that you can take a look at when you have some time. And this is just a picture describing what we can do to support you in say, an initial analysis or a workshop, if you will, or POC. So take a look when you have a chance. It'd be great. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Brian. So let's go to the next slide. And here we have a website just focused on Migration Center. You can get a whole slew of information there. Feel free to hit the site, and any questions that come up, I think we even have an info ad. You could submit questions via email if needed. And let's go to the next slide. And here, I think I'm going to segue this back to Cheryl.
Yes, and thank you very much, Frank and Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
No problem.
Okay, terrific. Okay, thank you very much for your presentations today. And before we go into the Q&A session, I just wanted to let you know that we'd like to remind you that the first 2 webinars in the series are available on demand at www.nchoice.com in our resources section. These webinars are Documentum V2, What's New and What's Next, and Spotlight on New Documentum Features and Effective Backup and Recovery for the Documentum Content Server. And those, again, are available at the nChoice website. Now we'll begin our Q&A session. Please use the questions box on your control panel to submit your questions. And while we're waiting for those to roll in, I wanted to let you know that within 24 hours you'll receive a link to a recording of the presentation. And if you'd like more information on anything that was discussed today, you can, or want to share your thoughts on any future webinars you'd like to see, please email at info@fme.org or you can visit the FME website. As you can see, there's a couple of different variations there depending on where you're located in the world. Okay, and let me just take a look at our first question here. Okay. All right, I've got a question here from one of our audience. It says, could you provide a case study to describe what exactly the software can provide for an organization? They want to know if you have something like that available.
I know that there's a number of case studies that are available, definitely from EMC. I know that here at FME we're crafting some case studies as well, so we certainly can provide, I think, Brian, I know that we can provide some type of case study information to the person asking the question.
Yeah, absolutely. There's case studies on emc.com/InfoArchive, and we have some case studies with an energy company and a financial services company as well. So please visit that site, and you can look at those case studies. Any other questions?
Okay. I have another one here. Can both structured and unstructured data be combined in the solution?
So, Brian, you want to start that one, and I can, if I need to add.
Sure, absolutely. One of the great things about InfoArchive is it is an open platform based on XML, and we have the ability to ingest both unstructured content and structured data into the same platform, so that whether you're decommissioning a file serve or another type of application, but the information that you're bringing in, even though it's from different applications, is related, you can bring both of those in, and then InfoArchive can help you show the relation between the content and the data within inside a single platform.
Okay, thank you very much on that one. And another one here is, what type of storage does this require? For InfoArchive, it looks like.
Yeah. Here's another nice thing about InfoArchive. It is a product that comes from EMC, and we work with pretty much every storage platform that's provided by EMC. And when I was introducing it, I mentioned Isilon, but we work with Centera. We work with the other storage platforms as well from EMC. It's also an open enough system as well that if you have existing storage from somebody who's not EMC, it can work with that as well.
Okay, thank you. Here's another for you. Can InfoArchive be implemented in an existing D7 environment just to archive old static data?
So I think that answer is yes. Yeah. So if you have a D7, I mean, there's some configuration to do to configure InfoArchive. But if you have an existing D7 platform implemented, you can technically add InfoArchive to that. I mean, there's probably some recommendations that I would make, but in terms of the repository configuration, but you can leverage that investment, your current D7 investment in terms of servers, et cetera. But we'd also have to look at volume, scaling. I don't want to say it all depends, but it does depend on certain criteria in terms of technology decisions, in terms of volume and consumption. So technically, yes. But there's probably a few more detailed questions that I'd like to get into to really get to the right answer.
Okay, thank you. Can active and inactive content be viewed using a single UI like WebTop or D2?
So I'll answer that, and then Bryant, you can chime in if I miss something. So because the consumption model is open, there's a provided configuration framework to consume a GUI framework for InfoArchive, but it's all behind it is a service layer. So it can be you can integrate the InfoArchive into your existing applications. There may be some extensions to create like a widget. For example, a D2 widget can be created to access the InfoArchive based on the context that, for example, if you have a claim system, you have a claim folder, and we put the metadata into the InfoArchive that has context to sort of that claim or that claim category, it can be integrated so that you can. There's a little bit of configuration and some work to do it, but it's possible given the openness of the web services layer for the InfoArchive.
Thank you, Frank. What is a hybrid record?
So a hybrid record would be more the sort of structured and semi-unstructured. So it's both structured and unstructured. So sort of this hybrid record. I don't know, Bryant, if you want to add to that.
Sure. The best way to look at it is, if you're looking at SharePoint, you know that you have both data and content in SharePoint. And if you're looking at migrating off of SharePoint, you want to keep those records together. And InfoArchive has the ability to combine both the content and the data into a single logical record. So it's always combined so that when you go and look at it, you're going to see both components of that record. Another way to look at it also is a hybrid record can capture an event. So we have financial organizations that use the hybrid record, and they're able to pull in multiple data types from multiple data sources and be able to have all of those data sources that relate to, say, a financial transaction. So whether it's a telephone recording, whether it's prospectus, the actual trade, all of that information can be combined into a single hybrid record type. That's really important when they need to go back and look at a single event, and that single event then is captured within that record.
Right, and then that record could be one collection record within, and have many of those within one package. So I mean, there's some of the concepts that I mentioned. All of what Brian said is true, and we can actually, and that's part of this whole SIP creation. All of those relationships, if you will, are packaged together into this XML, the metadata. So then it could be ingested, and also then all of that could be searched and presented to the user on the consuming side.
Thank you, guys. Got some more questions here, as a matter of fact, and we've got a few more minutes. So if anybody else has anything else they want to get in, now's the time. I have got here, does the capability to watch a file server and automatically archive content based upon different rule sets exist with InfoArchive/FME Migration Center?
So that was a file share, right? Like a network file share? Is that what you said?
Let's see. Yes, I said file server, to watch a file server.
Yeah, so we can monitor a file server. We know what we've collected. So in Migration Center, once we can go after individual folders. We can exclude folders on the collection piece, so we can really focus in and set up different collection processes. So we might want to look at this folder and exclude certain things from it in the subfolders, or we might want to grab it all. So we can do both, and we also know, based on hash, we have a very detailed way of checking what we've already collected. So anytime that file changes and it's overwritten with a new file, we know it. So we'll do all the incremental. So once we baseline the folder structure and collect it that first time, all of the incremental changes that happen within that network file share, we're grabbing the changes only. And we push that into Documentum, or the spirit of today is InfoArchive, so we could do both.
Thank you, Frank. I do have one more question here. I might have time for two if we're lucky. Let's see. Okay. How is storage cost getting reduced as inactive data is also requires some storage? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I can take a quick crack at it, and then Bryant, you could jump in.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
in many systems or customers that I work with, predominantly those production active systems have, I would say, typically have higher end storage. SAN, highly redundant SAN storage capability, and there's obviously other alternative storage technologies that are much cheaper, per gigabyte or per terabyte. So when we say about grabbing the inactive data and putting it into InfoArchive, there's two things that I think Bryant summarized as well in his messaging. One is we're thinning out the active system. So from a performance perspective, we're keeping that productive system lean. And the second value that you get from the storage side is we can push that information into InfoArchive, which is on a different tiered storage, a lower cost model, but the same level, with redundancy and things that you would expect, but on a much lower costing model. So that's sort of the framework, if you will, that the definition for that question. So I don't know, Brian, if I missed anything.
No, I think you hit a lot of the good points there. I mean, some of it, when you're able to archive off, you can also look at tiering your storage as well, and that helps reduce the storage costs. Also, during a decommissioning exercise, you'll find that you might be keeping old legacy applications up on older storage where you're paying extended maintenance on that older storage. And so that's an added cost. And then when you decommission it, there can also be compression, but you might also find out that a lot of the information you're holding you don't need to hold anymore. You can actually get rid of it, and thus reducing your storage costs as well.
Yeah, that's another good point I didn't mention. Once you get into this unified archive and you start to embrace a retention schedule, and I know this is a difficult discussion, but when you're able to start to purge and to clean up, remove information based on regulation or based on businesses' policies, you start to gain even additional value. That's a maturing process from a records management perspective. But the capability is in the technology, is in the platform.
Okay, thank you. And it looks like we are just about out of time, so I wanted to say thank you again to Frank and Bryant for all the information today. That concludes today's webinar. All questions that we're not able to get to will be answered via email. As mentioned earlier, you'll receive an email within the next 24 hours containing the link to the recorded version of this presentation. Thanks for joining us, and have a great day.